Money did not begin with trade, it began with power. Before markets, before merchants, before coins clinked in crowded bazaars, rulers were already keeping records of what people owed them, not what they exchanged, what they owed. And if that's true, then money wasn't created to make life easier. It was created to measure obedience. That changes everything. Because if money began as a system of enforced obligation, then modern banking, government debt, inflation, taxation, even your mortgage, are not neutral tools of exchange. They are part of a system thousands of years old, a system designed around control. Tonight, we uncover the hidden architecture of money. Not the story taught in textbooks, but the story written in clay tablets, enforced by kings and refined by empires. We'll follow how debt came before coins, how temples became financial authorities, how rulers monetized entire populations, how war accelerated currency, how debt crises destabilized civilizations, and how modern central banking still runs on the same ancient logic. The first truth we need to confront is simple. Barter did not create money. There is no archaeological evidence of large societies built on random barter between strangers. The famous image, one villager trading goats for grain while searching desperately for someone who wants exactly what he has, is a story invented much later. It's neat, logical, comforting, but it's wrong. The earliest economic records in human history do not describe barter markets. They describe accounting systems. In ancient Mesopotamia, cities like Uruk and Lagash kept meticulous records, not of trade between equals, but of obligations to temples and rulers. Farmers received land to cultivate. They received tools, seed, protection. In return, they owed a portion of their harvest. That obligation was recorded in clay, measured in units of grain or silver weight. These were not coins. They were entries. If you owed 5 shekels of silver, that didn't mean you physically held silver. It meant your obligation was measured against it. The unit of account existed before the circulating object. This is the second truth. Debt systems existed before coins, before markets, before banks. Temples functioned as centralized economic hubs. They stored grain. They redistributed resources. They financed agricultural cycles. They recorded labor. In effect, they operated as proto-banks, but backed by divine authority, and divine authority is absolute. If a harvest failed, your debt remained. If you couldn't pay, your land could be seized. Your children could become bonded laborers. Debt was not a financial inconvenience. It was social leverage. The temple and palace weren't just religious or political institutions. They were financial authorities. And that's where the narrative shifts. Money was not invented to solve inefficiencies in trade. It was invented to measure, enforce, and expand systems of obligation. Kings needed armies. Armies required food. Food required coordination. Coordination required accounting. Accounting required standardized units. The solution wasn't barter. It was centralized measurement. As city-states expanded, taxation became formalized. Rulers demanded tribute. And tribute had to be measured consistently. Once obligations were denominated in a common unit, silver, grain, livestock, something interesting happened. People began using that unit to trade among themselves. Markets emerged from taxation, not the other way around. The state created demand for a unit of account. Citizens needed that unit to settle obligations. To get it, they produced goods and services. Trade expanded because the state imposed debt. This is the midpoint twist. Money was not born from voluntary exchange. It was born from enforced obligation. And once that system existed, power became scalable. Empires grew. In the 7th century BCE, in the Kingdom of Lydia, rulers began minting standardized metal coins. Why? Not because villagers demanded convenience, because kings needed to pay soldiers. War is expensive. Soldiers don't accept promises of grain at harvest time. They need portable, reliable payment. Stamped metal guaranteed by the state solved that problem. The coin was political technology. It carried authority embedded in metal. Once coins were issued, taxation completed the loop. The state demanded taxes in its own currency. Citizens now had no choice. They had to obtain that currency, even if they preferred barter, even if they lived in subsistence communities. Taxation forced monetization, and monetization expanded state reach. Now consider the consequence. If the state controls currency issuance and tax enforcement, it controls economic behavior. It can mobilize labor, fund war, reward allies, punish enemies. Currency becomes a strategic weapon. The Roman Empire perfected this model. Roman soldiers were paid in coins minted by imperial authority. Taxes flowed from provinces back to Rome. The empire's monetary network connected distant territories under a single economic logic. But there was a weakness. When emperors needed more money, especially during prolonged wars, they diluted the silver content in coins. On the surface, coins looked the same, but their intrinsic value dropped, prices rose, trust eroded. Inflation destabilized the economy. Because when money is state-controlled debt, altering it alters society. But rulers understood something critical. Debt systems can't expand forever without backlash. In ancient Mesopotamia, periodic jubilees erased debts, not out of mercy, out of necessity. When too many farmers fell into debt slavery, productivity declined, military recruitment weakened. Revolt became possible, so kings reset the system. They canceled obligations, restored land, rebalanced society. Debt forgiveness was a stabilizer, a pressure valve. It preserved authority by preventing collapse. Fast forward centuries, power shifted from temples to merchant bankers. During medieval Europe, monarchs borrowed heavily to fund wars. Families like the Medici became indispensable by financing rulers. Now the structure inverted slightly. Kings owed bankers, but bankers depended on royal enforcement to collect repayment. Debt became a partnership between political power and financial power. War expanded this alliance. Every major conflict required borrowing. Future tax revenue became collateral. Entire populations were effectively monetized. Citizens worked not only for their present needs, but to service sovereign debt accumulated by rulers. The creation of the Bank of England institutionalized this system. It was founded to manage government debt and finance war against France. Private investors lent to the crown. In exchange, they received interest backed by taxation. This was revolutionary. Money creation became formally tied to government borrowing. Public debt became permanent. The logic was elegant. The government issues bonds. Investors purchase them. The central bank manages currency and liquidity. Taxes guarantee repayment. War accelerates borrowing. Expansion requires credit. The system grows. Modern commercial banking extends this logic further. When you take out a loan, the bank doesn't transfer existing money. It creates new money as debt. Your promise to repay becomes an asset on the bank's balance sheet. Money creation is debt creation. This is the ancient model, digitized. Instead of clay tablets, we have databases. Instead of temples, we have central banks. Instead of tribute, we have taxation and interest payments. But the structure remains. Obligation first, circulation second. Control embedded throughout. Inflation, too, becomes a modern lever. When governments run persistent deficits, central banks expand money supply. Debt burdens shrink in real terms. But purchasing power erodes. Savers lose. Asset holders often gain. Wealth inequality widens. Power consolidates around those closest to money creation. And when crises hit, banking collapses, sovereign debt spirals, the same patterns emerge. Rescues, bailouts, liquidity injections, austerity measures. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund lend to distressed nations, but loans come with conditions. Policy reforms, spending cuts, structural changes. Debt becomes geopolitical leverage. Countries surrender economic autonomy in exchange for stabilization. The scale is global now. But the principle is ancient. Whoever defines the unit of account and enforces its acceptance shapes the system. Black markets inevitably arise wherever monetary control tightens. From ancient coin clipping to modern shadow banking networks. From tax evasion in empires to offshore accounts in financial havens. The more centralized the control, the more creative the resistance. Even cryptocurrencies emerged from distrust of centralized monetary authority. Yet over time, exchanges centralized, regulation increased, power reconcentrated. The cycle persists. Origins, expansion, crisis, reset, reassertion of control. The most important realization is this: money is not just a neutral medium of exchange. It is a social technology of obligation. Its power lies not in metal or paper, but in enforcement. Courts enforce contracts. Governments enforce taxation. Central banks enforce monetary policy. Belief sustains it. Authority protects it. Remove enforcement, and money dissolves. Which brings us to the present. Today, global debt sits at historic highs. Governments owe trillions. Corporations borrow aggressively. Households rely on credit. Financial markets trade promises layered upon promises. The system functions because trust holds. But beneath the complexity lies the same ancient structure carved into clay thousands of years ago: recorded obligations. Measured in standardized units, backed by authority, managed to preserve power. When we ask who controls money today, the answer isn't simple. Central banks influence supply. Governments define legal tender. Commercial banks create credit. Institutional investors allocate capital. But all operate within the same architecture. Debt drives expansion. Interest redistributes wealth. Taxation enforces demand. Inflation adjusts burdens. Crisis resets excess. Money did not evolve away from its origins, it scaled them. The faces changed, the language modernized, the ledgers digitized. But the core mechanism endures. The birth of money was not a market innovation, it was a governance strategy. A way to quantify what society owed to authority. And once quantified, it could be expanded, leveraged, traded, securitized, globalized. The ledger never disappeared. It just went digital. So the next time you see headlines about rising interest rates, sovereign debt ceilings, inflation targets, or banking crises, remember this. You are not watching a new system struggle. You are watching an ancient one adjust. Because from the first temple accountants in Mesopotamia, to the vaults of central banks, to the algorithms of modern finance, the logic remains unchanged. Money measures obligation. Obligation structures society. And whoever controls the measurement shapes the world. The birth of money was not the birth of trade. It was the birth of scalable control. And that ledger is still being written.